All right, welcome to Bee Gees and Me. I'm David Fedor. Today is a versus episode where we talk about another musical group or musical act and sort of compare them to the Bee Gees. Today, it's Bee Gees versus U2. And to help me with that today is Frode Apeland.
Yeah, perfect.
Frode, welcome to Bee Gees and Me.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here, and I'm a big fan of your show. I think I've listened to all of your podcasts, and it's so great to be here to talk about my two favorite groups ever, I would say. Yeah.
Well, what's fun and what's going to be fun comparing them here just in a moment is that both the Bee Gees and U2 are both iconic international bands.
Yeah.
They have that huge long career spanning multiple decades, and their sound changed from when they started beginning performing and to where they are currently. Of course, the Bee Gees, if you're listening to this, your chances are you're a Bee Gees fan, so you know that Barry, Robin, and Maurice, the brothers Gibb, are the Bee Gees. And you might not know, so I'll give you a little bit of info on U2. You know who U2 you know who they are, but if you don't, U2 is an Irish rock band from Dublin formed in 1976. The group consists of Bono with lead vocals and rhythm guitar. The Edge, that's the guy's name. How cool is that? He wore that like ski cap and was the cool looking one.
That's not his real name, of course.
But he was on lead guitar, keyboards, and backing vocals. Adam Clayton on bass guitar, and Larry Mullen Jr. on drums and percussion. Initially rooted in post-punk, U2's musical style has evolved throughout their career, yet has maintained the anthemic quality built on Bono's expressive vocals, on the Edge's chiming, effects-based guitar sounds. Their lyrics, often embellished with spiritual imagery, focus on personal and socio-political themes. Popular for their live performances, the group has staged several ambitious and elaborate tours over their career. All right, so let's go now for the Bee Gees versus U2, Tale of the Tape. All right, the Bee Gees have released 22 studio albums, had 83 singles, 2 live albums, 15 compilations, and appeared on 4 soundtracks. One of those soundtracks was 1977 Saturday Night Fever, which puts the Brothers Gibb's estimated total records sold at 220 million during that career that spanned multiple genres and 4+ decades. U2 has released 14 studio albums, had 73 singles, 1 live album, 9 EPs, and 3 compilations. U2 has sold an estimated 175 million records worldwide, with 8 albums reaching number 1 in the US, third most out of any group. Impressive numbers, very neck and neck over multiple decades of music. What do you think of the Tale of the Tape, Frode?
It is very impressive. And I also read somewhere, several places actually, that Bee Gees is the 6th most biggest selling group of all time.
Yeah. If you take into consideration Saturday Night Fever, and I think a lot of these stats have Saturday Night Fever's soundtrack included in, because otherwise, then they wouldn't have sold. To me, I think that's a Bee Gees album. That Saturday Night Fever,
it is
like it, and I always say, and this is going to be a podcast for another day, I would be astounded and amazed to know what it would have been like had they released it as its own album instead of having that music folded into the movie. Right. I think they would have had a different career path. I think they could have had different, I think their respect would have been a little bit different, I think, if it wasn't attached. But regardless, that's another thing. One of the things between those numbers that I just told that interests me is U2 has had 8 of their albums reaching number 1. The Bee Gees in their time have only had 1 album reach number 1, and that was Spirits Haven't Flown.
Right.
Of course, not counting the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack.
So, you get to say 2 albums then.
Yeah. So we'd say two albums, number 1. Of course, Saturday Night Fever is one of the biggest albums of all time. Yeah. So that's hard to compare anything to that. So let's take a look at the Billboard Hot 100. The Bee Gees have recorded 43 songs in the Billboard Hot 100. 15 were top 10 hits. 9 of those reached number 1. U2 has recorded 34 songs that made it to the Billboard's Top 100. 6 were top 10 hits, 2 of which hit number 1. Frode, can you name the 2 U.S. number 1 hits for
that
U2?
was a very difficult question. No, I would say no. I would think With or Without You.
That is the first of theirs, yes.
And then the other one is more difficult. One, perhaps?
Nope.
No.
I'll give you a hint. It's off the same album, Joshua Tree.
Right, yes. Fly. That's the first.
I still haven't found what I'm looking for.
Oh, yeah, that's from the Joshua Tree. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. So so With or Without You peaked at number 1 on May 16th, 1987. And then later on that year on August 8th, 1987, I still haven't found what I'm looking for. Was their other number 1 hit. So even though they had more number 1 albums, their songs didn't peak as much as the Bee Gees did.
And it also tells you how difficult it is to write a number 1 hit.
All right, let's take a look now at awards. Now, this is the area that always will go to the other people besides the Bee Gees. The Bee Gees have not been critically acclaimed or critically rewarded until later in their careers. They have 9 Grammy nominations on only 5 wins. They've had 5 American Music Awards, Songwriters Hall of Fame in 1994, and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1997. They were named Commanders of the British Empire in 2001, and Barry Gibb was knighted in the year 2018. U2, on the other hand, have 46 nominations for Grammy Awards and have won 22 Grammy Awards. They won Best Rock Performance by a Duo Group 7 times, while winning Album of the Year, Record of the Year, Song of the Year, and Best Rock Album of the Year, all twice each. They have 1 American Music Award for Artist of the Year in 2002. They've received 2 Golden Globes, and in 2005 were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Right, yes. And that's very interesting because you could say that the number of awards U2 have won, that's the most for any group in history, by the way.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, and no group has won as many Grammy Awards as U2. I would say that the number of Grammy Awards they have won clearly exceeds the popularity of U2. They're probably not the most popular band of all time, even though they're very hugely popular and very, very good band. But when it comes to Bee Gees, the number of awards they have won clearly undermines the quality of the band. And then the question is, why is it? I would say they're probably, both of them are huge in history. And then why is there such a gap between the number of awards they've won?
Yeah, definitely commercially they have their success, but the respect of the critics they never got. And again, who are these critics that are voting on this stuff? That's what you got to look at. Like, that's, I think, says more about the critics and what they say more than it does about the Bee Gees and their performance.
I also think there's another thing there. U2 is such a, or at least Bono, he's so concerned with politics, and he expresses his views on politics and religion at all times. Whereas Bee Gees, they have more songs about love all the time. They don't have as many political loaded songs.
Yeah, I could definitely see that as something that that an awards group would try to reward, to bring some attention to that socioeconomic, that political type of stance. And I think that's what helped Bruce Springsteen out, our last Versus episode as well. There was a lot of loaded political stuff built into his performances as well. Now, this is now where I have to say the disclaimer that this is, of course, a fun exercise of comparing these two groups, that there's no real winner or loser of the Bee Gees versus U2. This isn't, one has to win. This music is subjective. You're allowed to like both of them. You're allowed to like some of one and some of the other. You're allowed to like them both. So, just like I had with Bruce Springsteen, I don't want people to necessarily choose. This is kind of just a way to get people exposed to other music and to have a fun conversation about it. And if it was a real contest, the Bee Gees would win because this is my show.
Yes.
So
good point.
I want to end this segment with a fun fact. This head-to-head segment where we're talking about Bee Gees versus U2. Just like we did with Bruce Springsteen, we found a way that the Bee Gees and Bruce connected. So Barry Gibb and Bruce Springsteen did cover versions of each other's songs at live performances back in, the 2014, 2013 timeframe. So going forward with these Versus episodes, I want to find similar connections to bring the unity together of these two groups. So instead of Bee Gees versus U2, it's Bee Gees and U2. Mm-hmm. So this is a fun versus fact. So fun versus fact for Bee Gees and U2. Anton Corbijn is a Dutch photographer, film director, and music video director. He is the creative director behind the visual output of Depeche Mode and U2, having handled both the principal promotion and sleeve photography for both of these bands over 3 decades. He was also the photographer for the Bee Gees' Still Waters album, capturing the cover of that album and also the cover of its single, Alone. So if you look at the iconic cover of U2's 1987 album, Joshua Tree, you could see that it shares a lot of composition with the Bee Gees' 1997 album, Still Waters. How each photo is framed with both sideways profile Bono and U2 and Maurice and the Bee Gees, the dark clothing, the black and white images, the significant landscape setting. It's a super cool connection that I wouldn't have known unless I looked into it a little deeper and found out. So thank you, Frodo, for introducing me this concept in this episode, because I wouldn't have discovered Anton Corbijn's photography connection.
That was very interesting. I didn't know about that. and they look a lot similar.
Yeah. So there you go. That's Bee Gees versus U2. I think we laid out a nice groundwork for the listeners at home to make their own decision on who is better, even though, again, like I said, you don't have to choose. It's just how we're looking at it. Frode, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. It was wonderful to talk with you about these two iconic international bands.
Thank you so much for having me.